A government minister just admitted something in a private meeting that they would never say publicly. When asked about London's housing crisis, they didn't talk about building more homes or helping first-time buyers. Instead, they said something that would shock most Londoners. They said that house prices in London can never be allowed to fall significantly because the entire UK economy would collapse if they did. This wasn't a policy discussion. It was a statement of fact about how the British financial system actually works. London house prices aren't high because of supply and demand. They're high because the government, the banks, the pension funds, and the wealthiest people in the country have built the entire economy around ever-increasing property values. And they will do whatever it takes to protect that system, even if it means ordinary families can never afford homes again. This is the hidden reason why London house prices will never come down. It's not about market forces or housing shortages. It's about a deliberately designed wealth extraction machine that requires property values to keep rising forever. And once you understand how this system works, you'll realize why every government promise about affordable housing is complete nonsense. The first thing you need to understand is that London property isn't really about housing anymore. It's become the world's largest money laundering operation, and the people running it have no intention of letting it end. Every year, approximately £15 billion of dirty money flows into London property from criminals, corrupt politicians, and oligarchs around the world. This isn't speculation. It's documented by anti-corruption organizations and even acknowledged by government reports that are quickly buried. Here's how it works. A corrupt official in Africa steals £50 million from government contracts. They can't put that money in banks because it would be traced and frozen. But they can buy a mansion in Belgravia for £50 million through a shell company registered in the British Virgin Islands. The property purchase looks legitimate, the money is now clean, and London house prices go up because there's another £50 million chasing limited property. Multiply this by thousands of transactions every year, and you have billions of pounds of criminal money artificially inflating London property values. But here's the crucial part. The British government could stop this tomorrow. They could require beneficial ownership disclosure for all property purchases. They could ban shell company ownership of residential property. They could implement proper anti-money laundering enforcement, but they don't, because this dirty money is essential to maintaining high property values. Every time international criminals buy overpriced London properties, they're subsidizing the property values of every other London homeowner. Remove that criminal money, and property values would collapse overnight. So the government turns a blind eye to money laundering because it props up the housing market that the entire economy depends on. Estate agents in Mayfair openly advertise their services to clients who want to avoid financial disclosure requirements. Law firms specialize in creating corporate structures that hide property ownership, and the authorities pretend not to notice because stopping money laundering would crash the property market and destroy the wealth of millions of British homeowners. The second pillar holding up London house prices is government policy that's specifically designed to prevent prices from falling, and most people have no idea this is happening. Every major housing policy introduced in the last 20 years has been designed not to make housing affordable, but to maintain property values while appearing to help first-time buyers. Take Help to Buy, which the government promoted as assistance for young people to get on the property ladder. In reality, Help to Buy pumped billions of pounds of public money directly into house prices. The scheme allowed buyers to borrow more money to chase the same limited housing supply, which inevitably pushed prices higher. Developers loved Help to Buy because it meant they could charge higher prices and still find buyers. Existing homeowners loved it because their property values increased, but it made housing less affordable for everyone who didn't qualify for the scheme. That wasn't an unintended consequence. It was the entire point. The government needed a way to keep property prices rising without being honest about their intentions. Help to Buy was marketing designed to hide a house price inflation scheme. Right to Buy had exactly the same effect. The government sold council houses at massive discounts, which looked like they were helping tenants. But selling public housing at below market value created artificial demand that pushed up prices in the surrounding private market. Many right-to-buy properties were quickly resold to private landlords at market rates, removing them from affordable housing forever while inflating local property values. Every stamp duty holiday, every first-time buyer scheme, every shared ownership program follows the same pattern. They pump public money into housing demand while doing nothing to increase supply. The inevitable result is higher prices. But the government can claim they're helping homebuyers while actually making housing less affordable. Even planning permission policies are designed to maintain high prices. Local councils systematically reject housing developments that might reduce property values in expensive areas. They claim to be protecting green space or community character, but they're actually protecting the wealth of existing homeowners who vote in local elections. Meanwhile, social housing construction has been deliberately sabotaged. The government could build hundreds of thousands of affordable homes, but doing so would increase housing supply enough to moderate prices across the entire market. So they build token amounts of social housing while ensuring there's never enough to affect overall supply and demand dynamics. The third reason London house prices can never fall is that the entire British banking system would collapse if they did. And this is where the hidden mechanics of the economy become clear. British banks hold approximately £1.5 trillion in mortgage debt secured against residential property. That's roughly 3/4 of the entire UK GDP. If London house prices fell by just 20%, hundreds of thousands of homeowners would be in negative equity, meaning they owe more on their mortgages than their homes are worth. Many would default on their loans, creating massive losses for the banks. But the problem goes much deeper than individual mortgage defaults. British banks use property values as collateral for their own borrowing and investment activities. When property values rise, banks can lend more money because their collateral is worth more. When property values fall, banks face liquidity crises because their collateral is worth less. A significant drop in London property values would trigger a banking crisis that would make 2008 look minor. The banks know this, which is why they've spent the last 15 years lobbying for policies that prop up house prices. Low interest rates aren't designed to help the economy recover. They're designed to keep mortgage payments affordable so property values don't collapse. Quantitative easing wasn't about stimulating business investment. It pumped money into financial markets that inevitably flowed into property speculation. The Bank of England's stress tests for banks specifically model scenarios where house prices keep rising. They don't seriously plan for sustained property value declines because the entire banking system is designed around ever-increasing property wealth. Pension funds face the same problem. British pension schemes hold hundreds of billions of pounds in property-related investments. Many pension funds own commercial property directly, invest in house-building companies, or hold bank shares that depend on mortgage lending. If property values collapsed, pension fund returns would disappear, creating a retirement crisis for millions of people. So pension fund managers actively lobby for policies that maintain high property values, regardless of the impact on young people trying to buy homes. The fourth pillar is something most people never consider, but it's arguably the most important. The British political class is personally invested in maintaining high property values because their own wealth depends on it. Almost every member of parliament owns property in London. Many own multiple properties. Cabinet ministers routinely have property portfolios worth millions of pounds. When house prices rise, politicians get personally richer. When house prices fall, they lose money. This creates an obvious conflict of interest that nobody talks about. Politicians are supposed to represent all their constituents, including young people who can't afford homes. But their personal financial interests align with existing homeowners who want property values to keep rising. The result is housing policies that protect property wealth rather than increasing housing affordability. But the problem goes beyond individual politicians owning property. The entire Westminster system is designed around property wealth. Political donations come largely from people who've made fortunes in property development, estate agency, or financial services connected to housing. These donors expect politicians to protect their business interests, which means maintaining the conditions that keep property values high. Political parties hold fundraising events at expensive London properties owned by major donors. They receive millions of pounds from property developers who want planning laws that favour their projects. They're advised by think tanks funded by organisations that profit from expensive housing. The revolving door between politics and the property industry ensures that housing policy is made by people who profit from high house prices. Former housing ministers regularly take high-paid jobs with property companies. Senior civil servants move to lobbying firms that represent developer interests. And current politicians know that protecting property industry profits will be rewarded with lucrative opportunities after they leave office. This system makes it virtually impossible for politicians to implement policies that would significantly reduce property values, even if they wanted to. Their personal wealth, their political funding, and their future career prospects all depend on maintaining the status quo. The fifth reason involves something called land banking that most Londoners have never heard of, but it's one of the biggest scams in the property industry. Major property developers and investment funds have spent decades buying up land around London, not to build homes, but to control supply and maintain high prices. Here's how it works. When developers get planning permission for new housing, they don't have to build the homes immediately. They can sit on the permission for years while land values increase. Meanwhile, they can sell the planning permission to other developers, take out loans secured against the future development value, or simply wait until market conditions allow them to maximize profits. The result is thousands of homes that have planning permission but will never be built because developers make more money holding the land than developing it. Land banking is particularly profitable around transport infrastructure projects. When the government announces a new railway line or underground extension, property companies buy up land along the route years before construction begins. They know that improved transport links will increase land values, so they acquire as much land as possible to capture that increase. But instead of building homes that local people could afford, they hold the land until gentrification makes luxury development more profitable. Crossrail is the perfect example. Property companies spent years buying land around future Crossrail stations, but most of that land is still undeveloped years after the stations opened. The companies are waiting for local areas to become expensive enough to justify premium residential developments. Meanwhile, thousands of potential homes remain unbuilt while housing shortages push prices higher everywhere else. Major pension funds and sovereign wealth funds are also involved in land banking. They buy large plots of London land as long-term investments, with no intention of ever developing housing. From their perspective, land is a store of value that appreciates over time. Building homes would reduce the scarcity value of land, which would reduce their investment returns. So they have a direct financial interest in ensuring housing shortages continue. The government could easily stop land banking by implementing use it or lose it planning permissions that expire if development doesn't begin within a reasonable time frame. They could tax undeveloped land at rates that make land banking unprofitable. But they don't, because land banking serves the interests of property investors who want to maintain artificial scarcity. The sixth factor is the most cynical of all, and it explains why every supposed solution to London's housing crisis is designed to fail. The government and property industry have created an entire ecosystem of fake solutions that appear to address housing affordability while actually making the problem worse. Shared ownership is the perfect example. The government promotes shared ownership as a way for young people to get on the property ladder by buying a share of a property and paying rent on the remainder. It sounds helpful, but the reality is that shared ownership makes home ownership more expensive, not less. Shared ownership buyers pay mortgage payments on their share, rent on the remaining share, plus service charges and maintenance costs. The total monthly costs are typically higher than renting a comparable private property. But buyers are convinced they're building equity, even though they often can't afford to buy additional shares and face massive fees if they want to sell. Meanwhile, housing associations that provide shared ownership properties receive government subsidies supposedly to make housing affordable. But they use those subsidies to develop properties in expensive areas where shared ownership prices are still unaffordable for ordinary workers. The subsidies effectively transfer public money to property developers, while creating the appearance of helping first-time buyers. Affordable housing requirements for new developments follow the same pattern. Local councils require new developments to include a percentage of affordable homes, but the definition of affordable is based on local market rents, not what ordinary people can actually afford. In expensive areas of London, affordable rent can still be £2,000 per month or more. Developers are happy to include these supposedly affordable units because they can charge premium prices while claiming to address housing needs. Or they pay fees to councils instead of building affordable homes, which councils use for other purposes while the housing shortage continues. The government's commitment to building more social housing sounds promising until you look at the numbers. They promise to build hundreds of thousands of homes over several years, but London alone needs tens of thousands of new homes every year just to keep up with population growth. The promised social housing construction isn't even enough to prevent the housing shortage from getting worse, let alone to improve affordability for people who already can't find homes. The seventh, and perhaps most important reason, is that London house prices are now essential to maintaining Britain's international financial position. And this is where the economics become truly shocking. London property has become one of Britain's most important exports, even though exports are supposed to involve selling goods to other countries, not selling your own cities to foreign investors. Approximately 60% of new luxury properties in central London are sold to overseas buyers who don't live in the UK. These sales bring billions of pounds into the British economy every year, helping to balance the trade deficit and support the value of the pound. But this only works if London property values continue to rise faster than property values in other international cities. If London property became affordable for ordinary British people, it would no longer be attractive to wealthy international investors. The flow of foreign money would dry up, creating balance of payments problems for the entire UK economy. So maintaining unaffordable London house prices isn't just about protecting domestic property wealth, it's about attracting international investment that Britain desperately needs to fund its current account deficit. The government actively markets London property to wealthy foreigners through trade missions, diplomatic events, and partnerships with international estate agencies. British embassies around the world help wealthy individuals navigate the property purchase process. Meanwhile, the same government claims to be concerned about housing affordability for British families. The contradiction is obvious but necessary because Britain's international economic position depends on selling London real estate to the global wealthy. This creates a fundamental conflict between housing policy and economic policy that can never be resolved under the current system. Making housing affordable for British families would reduce the international investment that Britain's economy depends on. So the government has to choose between housing British people and maintaining economic stability, and they've clearly chosen economic stability. Tax policy reinforces this choice. Foreign property investors can often avoid taxes that British buyers would have to pay. Shell company ownership structures allow international buyers to avoid stamp duty and capital gains tax. Meanwhile, British first-time buyers face the full burden of property taxes designed to discourage speculation. The tax system is specifically designed to favour foreign investors over domestic home buyers because foreign investment is considered more valuable to the economy than housing British families. Here's the final piece of the puzzle that explains why nothing will ever change. The people who could fix London's housing crisis are the same people who profit most from maintaining the current system. Property developers, bank executives, pension fund managers, and politicians all benefit financially from rising house prices. They're not going to implement changes that would reduce their own wealth, even if those changes would help millions of ordinary families. But more importantly, they've convinced the majority of existing homeowners that their interests align with property investors rather than with young people trying to buy homes. Homeowners are told that new housing construction would reduce their property values. They're warned that affordable housing would bring down the tone of their neighbourhoods. They're encouraged to oppose any development that might increase supply enough to moderate prices. This creates a political coalition of property investors and existing homeowners against anyone who wants affordable housing. Since existing homeowners vote in much higher numbers than young renters, politicians have strong incentives to protect property values rather than improve housing affordability. The result is a system where the people most harmed by high house prices have the least political power to change anything. Meanwhile, the beneficiaries of the current system have convinced themselves that they're not responsible for the housing crisis. Property investors claim they're providing valuable services by developing homes, even though they mainly develop luxury properties for other wealthy investors. Politicians claim they're working to improve housing affordability while implementing policies that do the exact opposite. Banks claim they're helping people achieve home ownership while designing lending criteria that exclude most young people from the market. This self-deception allows the system to continue because the people running it don't have to acknowledge that they're deliberately making housing unaffordable for ordinary families. They can maintain the fiction that high house prices are an unfortunate side effect of market forces rather than the intended outcome of policies they've actively supported. The housing crisis in London isn't a market failure. It's a market success for everyone who owns property, invests in property companies, or profits from property-related financial services. And since these groups control government policy, banking regulation, and planning decisions, there's no mechanism for the system to change direction. London house prices will never come down because the people with the power to reduce them are the same people who profit from keeping them high. And they've structured the entire economy around the assumption that property values will keep rising forever, making any significant price reduction economically catastrophic for everyone except the young people who are already excluded from home ownership.